Until now, we've talked about the godly soul, its substance, its structure, its components, its garments, its agenda. Its agenda, as we've discussed, is learning Torah, doing mitzvahs, because that's how it connects to God, and that's what the godly soul wants, is to connect to God. But in the agenda itself, which is to study Torah and doing mitzvahs, in this chapter, in chapter 5, we are going to focus specifically on something very, very special about the study of Torah. And before we get there, something which a lot of people know about Torah study, if you're going to go into a yeshiva, and you're going to see that there are people sitting with the Talmuds and they're studying, and you're going to pull over one of the guys and say, hey, what are you learning? The chances are that the topic that they're studying is something which is so remote, and the possibility of that actually ever playing out in real life is so, the odds are next to nothing. And they're sitting and they're animated and they're discussing, well, if two people are holding on to this talus and one person says half is mine, the other person says half is mine, what do we do? What if one person says 3/4, the whole thing is mine, and the other one says half is mine? Then what do we do? And this is just one example of so many others, and many others which are even much more remote. Why are they wasting their time learning what the halacha would be, what the law would be, in instances which, number one, barely ever happen, and then besides for that, you have so much of Torah which doesn't apply today because so much of it only applies in Israel at the time when the Beis HaMikdash was standing. And why are we busy learning this stuff? And the Alter Rebbe explains that to think that we're learning Torah to know what to do, it might be true on one level, but that's really missing the larger point of what Torah is. The Talmud tells us that the first word of the Ten Commandments is Anochi, which means I. And the word Anochi, which means I, is a Rosh Tevis, is an acronym for Ana, Nafshi, Kisavis, Yehavis, which means that God says, I, and listen to this, I, myself, wrote myself into Torah and I gave myself. God gave himself to us in Torah. God is one with Torah, and when we're learning Torah, we are learning God's wisdom and connecting to God himself. So, when we are learning in the Talmud that if person A says this and person B argues otherwise, the halacha is going to be this. When you know what that halacha is, you are right now tuned into God's wisdom, and your mind is connecting with God's mind. And in the words of the Tanya, you are right now experiencing the greatest possible unity with God imaginable. There is no such unity as the unity that there is when a person studies Torah and understands the wisdom of the Torah. And by the way, this is why what has made Jews unique throughout the generations is that Torah study wasn't only for the scholars. Everyone always studied Torah. Torah was something which every Jew, the simple person, the lay person, everyone, you went to work and then you had a few moments, you went off to the study hall or you sat at home and you studied Torah. And you have to ask, why is that? Why does everyone have to know how to learn? The rabbi has to know. And if you have a question, you go, you ask the rabbi. But if learning Torah is about knowing what to do or knowing how to, in a certain predicament, what the solution were to be, okay, so you can have a few scholars and they tell everyone what to do, how to do, when to do. But if Torah is connecting to God, the rabbi can't connect to God for you. And ultimately, what we have to realize is that every single time that we study Torah, we are experiencing this unity with God, a mind-blowing unity, which, as Alter Rebbe will say later on in Tanya, in chapter 23, we're lucky that we can't feel and sense this unity, because if we were to sense this unity, we would evaporate. We wouldn't be able to withstand and tolerate the intensity of what's going on when we're studying Torah. So therefore, when we're talking about the agenda of the godly soul, we said there's learning Torah, doing mitzvahs, but there is this incredible advantage, which is specifically in the mitzvah of knowing Torah, which is that it creates a unity which is unparalleled with God. And you could say that is item number one on the agenda of the godly soul.